Hey guys, what's up everyone? My name is Murli and I'm a AWS solution architect. So in today's demo, we will look into AWS config, which is used to assess, audit, and evaluate your configurations on your resources. So basically, the primary use case for AWS config is to assess, audit, and evaluate the configurations of your AWS resources in your account. So it continuously monitor, record resource configurations, changes to simplify the change management. Okay, so basically, if you have your AWS resources, you want to make sure that any new resources which are created, make sure you want your resources to be compliant. You apply some rules. Based on that, your resources will be evaluated and then will be given a result saying that whether your AWS resources are compliant or non-compliant. Okay, we will look into the demo shortly, and also moreover the AWS config can help troubleshoot issues that may arise within the environment, allowing users to see the timeline of the events and to go back on any point in time to analyze what may have caused the issue or stopped the resource from working properly. Okay, so overall the AWS config is a versatile service that can be used for various use cases, so including monitoring, auditing AWS resources, compliance, security, and troubleshooting the issues. Okay, so we will look into one such example today where we will be creating a S3 bucket, and we want to make sure that our S3 bucket has the S3 logging enabled, and we will do that. Okay, so let's go to the AWS console. I've already logged into my console. So let's head over to the AWS config. So just in the search box, type config over here, and let's go to config, and so we are in the dashboard. Go to the config, click on this panel on the left side and click on rules. So basically we do not have any rules yet. Okay, so what we're going to do is we will be going to the S3 bucket like so, and then we will create a bucket. I have a bunch of buckets already, forget about that. Let's go ahead and create a new bucket, which is only config S3 bucket. Okay, I'm gonna enable the ACLs and leave this default, block all the public access, and you're good. Go ahead and click on create bucket. So basically I've created a bucket which is basically we will have to allow the permissions in the bucket. So we'll have to enable the access control list basically to in order to make sure that the log delivery group is does have access to the list and write access to the objects and also the bucket ACL. Okay, so just enable this and click on save changes. So now let me go to the config from here, and now let's go to the rules. Okay, so we are going to add a rule basically that says your S3 bucket I just created. So basically my S3 bucket does not have the logging enabled by default. So the server side logging is not enabled by default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rule to the AWS config that if a bucket does not have the logging enabled, then it is non-compliant. Okay, so for any future buckets or anything that you're going to create, make sure that you want to impose some rules on a new bucket, that you want to make sure that your buckets have this server-side logging enabled. So how do you do that in one place? So you can use the AWS config where you can impose some rules on your S3 buckets where the logging is enabled by default. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure that our S3 does not have this enabled. So click on S3 and open it in a new tab like so, and let's go to the bucket that we have just created, which is Murli config S3 bucket. Go to the properties, and if you scroll down a bit, and you can see the server access logging is disabled by default. So what we're going to do now is we will be going to AWS config, add a rule, which is a add AWS managed rule, and I'm gonna do something like S3 bucket logging enabled. So I'm going to select the S3 bucket logging enabled, so which supports detective and proactive mode. We will discuss about it later at point of time, and then what this basically does is, checks whether the logging is enabled for your S3 buckets. Okay, so it just makes sure that the logging is enabled for your S3 buckets. So that's what we're going to demo it now. Okay, now click on next and go to, you can also enable this turn on proactive evaluation, but I'm not going to do at this point of time because I want to make sure that the detective evaluation is successful. So click on that and resources, make sure AWS S3 bucket is selected and scroll down all the way to the bottom. So I'm going to put my bucket name over here, which is Murli S3 bucket. Just copy the name from here and go back to the tab. Just put the S3 bucket here, and also the target prefix is going to be just slash, and click on next, and that's it. Click on add rule. So which is going to basically add a rule, and it's going to scan for the resources and checks whether our S3 buckets are compliant or non-compliant. If our buckets are non-compliant, then you will see the detective compliance status here. Currently it doesn't show anything, but if you're gonna wait for a couple of minutes, and then you will be able to see that the detective compliance, it just shows something like, you have 3 or 4 buckets in my S3. So there are multiple buckets, so it will show the status, how many buckets are compliant with this rule and how many buckets are not. Okay, just give it a couple of minutes and refresh a couple of times. So you can see there are nearly 6 non-compliant resources. So now let's click on this rule, and you can see all my buckets are non-compliant, right? So the one that I've created is also not compliant. There are multiple buckets which are not compliant. Okay, so what we're gonna do, so we will go ahead and automatically enable the server-side logging, and then we will rerun this rule so that our one out of these 6 buckets be compliant, right? So how are we going to do it? So basically we have created something like the AWS Systems Manager. You can go to automation inside Systems Manager. If you go to Systems Manager and go to automation, so you can see here, right? So there are multiple already which is running, and click on execute automation. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to automation document. So we have already predefined documents over here. So I'm going to do AWS configure S3 bucket logging. Just hit enter. So you should get one option. This is the predefined template. I can mark it as favorite. So you can select this template and go ahead and click on next. Basically what we are doing is we will be executing an automation task where we will be enabling our S3 server side logging on our S3 bucket. Okay, so now click on next and go to, so this is a simple execution. Okay, input parameters, the bucket name is only a config S3 bucket, and the grant permission is full control. I'm going to give access, and the grantee type is group, and let's select the target bucket as this one, and grant email address. You can see these are all optional, so you can ignore that, but what I'm going to do is grantee URI. So I have the URI which I'm going to place it something like this, and then I ignore the automation as an assumed role. We will discuss about this a bit later. Basically it's optional, so you don't need to give this at this point of time. And what we are doing is we are giving a full control on our bucket in order to run an automation task to basically enable the server side logging. Okay, now go ahead and execute it. So it's going to take 2 minutes maybe, and then it's going to show the status as success. If not, I will show you what will be the errors. So maybe in our case there is no error, it's just success. So for some people you may get this kind of errors like, why did the AWS config auto remediation action. We will discuss about what is auto remediation action, but if you go back to the systems manager, right, you can see our execution has on the S3 bucket is already done, and you can see that put bucket blocking by URL is successfully executed. So what this means is go to S3 bucket and go to your Mulli config S3 bucket. You can go to properties, and if you scroll down a bit and go to server access logging, now you can see that our server access logging is enabled. And so now that it is enabled, we have executed an automation task, and that is now enabled. So if you go back to your AWS config click on the config and go back to the rules. This is still executing, so you can see if you go back to this one, right? So it is still showing as 6 non-compliant, but if you're gonna wait for a couple of minutes or so, you should be able to see that detective compliance will become 5 resources because we have made one S3 bucket compliant with our rule. Okay, so if I go, if it is not showing here, what you can do is just select this rule and go to actions and reevaluate, so that it's going to start reevaluating your resources, so that it will understand what are the AWS resources um, are compliant and non-compliant. Okay, so we're gonna wait for a couple of minutes, just refresh a couple of times. See, now it is 5 non-compliant resources. That means one of the resource is now compliant with the S3 bucket logging enabled rule. Okay, and you can see these are non-compliant, and if I go and click on compliant from here, and you can see now our fully config S3 bucket is now compliant because we have enabled the server logging. Okay, and yeah, and so if I go back to the rules, right, and select this rule, so make sure so if you will also be able to do the auto remediation, so basically manage remediation here, automatic remediation. So what this does is this remediation action gets triggered automatically when the resources in the scope becomes non-compliant. For example, it's pretty self-explanatory really. So if you change the status of S3 bucket, if your automatic remediation is set up already, so if you change your S3 bucket server-side logging to disable, then this automatic remediation will be triggered. And in the remediation, what it does is basically it will trigger the remediation and try to enable it and automatically fix the issues. Okay, and yeah, that's all basically the remediation action on the high level, but we will go through this in a detailed video. Okay, so for now, so I hope you understand what exactly is AWS config, what can AWS config will do. There are multiple actions here. You can go ahead and create add rules. There are multiple things that you can try. For example, if you go to EC2, you can see there are multiple actions, like for example auto scaling, capacity rebalancing. So there are multiple triggers. You can manage rules, you can, and if you want a description, you can go ahead and read these descriptions, which will help you to create the correct managed rule, so that your just to make sure that your resources are compliant for. Okay, so going back to the rules, what you can do now is you can terminate your, you can remove your S3 bucket and no longer need it, because I just want to make sure that the S3 logging is enabled. So I think you're done. And also just remove the rule after you have finished your testing with the compliance status, and then go ahead and actions and delete the results, and go ahead and delete. So it's gonna delete in some time, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a like, share, subscribe, thumbs up, and please comment down in the comment section below and ask me questions, or just comment out if you have anything, or if you want me to do something new, please let me know, and I'm happy to do the videos. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next video.